Okay, for today's class, I'll be discussing network installation guides in configuring your network. So this unit discusses the considerations and guidelines in implementing a local area network. So since this is networking one, we are dealing with local area network. So this also explains terms relating to networking. Okay, so these are several guides when you are installing cables or network cables. So always remember, try to avoid running cables parallel to power cables. Okay, so if you're going to run or install network cables, like for example Cat5 cable, do as much as possible do not make it parallel to power cables. I'll be explaining that later. There's electromagnetic interferences that can interfere with your network transmission. Avoid bending cables to the extent that it exceeds a 90-degree angle. Okay, so as much as possible, do not bend your cable on a 90 degrees angle. Para hindi siya basta-basta maputol sa loob. Okay, so as much as possible, avoid exceeding the 90 degrees angle bend on your cable. Okay, next is if you bundle a group of cables together with cable ties. If you're going to use cable ties, do not overcringe them or wag masyado masikip. You should be able to turn the tie with fingers. Okay, so if you're going to use any wires that you're going to use on a bundle of cables, so as much as possible, wag masyado masikip para hindi siya mas maputol sa loob. Okay? So, as much as possible, you can turn the tie with your fingers kahit papano. So, medyo there's a space on moving those ties on a bundle of group of cables. Okay, so next is keep cables away from devices which can introduce noise into them. So, here's a short list: copy machines, electric heaters, speakers, printers, your home appliances, and other stuffs like the uh, uh, other devices and appliances na nasa location. So as much as possible, keep away those cables because of the reason that most of the devices produces electromagnetic interferences that may interfere with your network connectivity. Okay, so next is avoid stretching UTP cables or tension when pulling cables should not exceed 25 pounds. Okay, so as much as possible, wag masyadong batak yung kable. Okay, siyempre, if masyadong hatak yung kable, there will be tension on the cable and baka maputol sa loob. Okay, so remember that UTP cables do have four pairs of wires, and some of those wires do have a specific function to network data transmission. So, kung maputol lang isa, there's a possibility that wala ka ng network data or network connectivity or that network data transmission. Okay, minimize twisting of the cable jackets. If you twist them too much, the jackets may tear. Okay? So, wag niyo pipihitin yung kable, mas masama, do not twist the cable. So, one of the reason kaya napuputol din siya is nati-twist yung cable. Okay? So, aside from the jacket being twisted, yung kable sa loob, there's a possibility na maputol din. Okay, next is do not use stapler or gun tacker to secure UTP cables. So, for the reason na baka in the long run, maputol din yung kable kung saan nyo ni-stapler or ginantacker. So, use telephone wire or RJ6 coaxial wire hangers which are available at most hardware stores. So, may mga C-clamp, kung ano namang clamp or PVC molding that you can use for it to be able to mount or to mount on your cables. Okay, so when installing cables on long distances, be sure to leave ample slack. Remember, a few feet of extra cable is a small price to pay to to avoid having to redo a cable run because of problem caused by stretched cable. So as much as possible, when especially for long distances installation of cables, so you have to make sure that you add access to the cable para in the event you need to troubleshoot, you need to reconnect, for example, or you need to recrimp the cable, uh, you still have an access to work on. So, mas mahirap na palitan mo yung buong kable. Okay? So for the purpose of being safe in the future, na for example, you need to re-terminate it again. So you have to make sure that you have excess cables on your installed cable or installed Cat5 cable. Okay, so we also have we also have to consider signal degradation. So when we are installing network components or network cables, so there's such a thing as signal degradation. So degradation sources can be internal or external. It may be a source from internal source or an external source. So it depends on the location that you where you deploy the network device. Okay, so for example, wireless antenna, which is installed outdoor. So there are different sources of signal degradation. So one of the signal degradation is what we call as attenuation. So that from the definition, when signal degrades over distance. So meaning to say, the longer the cable is, there may be the possibility of losing the signal. And in the case of Cat5 cable or UTP cable, so the maximum distance is 100 meters. So for example, if you're going to deploy from one computer going to another computer, so you should not exceed the 100-meter distance. Okay? So that's the maximum distance for the Cat5 cable. So if the event it's necessary to connect devices on a very long or a longer distance above 100 meters, so you have to use a repeater, or an example is a switch. So put a switch in the middle. Okay, so for example, if this is 200 meters, so you still have 100 meters from the source computer to the switch, and to the switch to the destination computer. So to repeat the signal. So okay, so that is the attenuation. So that the signal loss over distance. Okay, so next is we have the electromagnetic interference. So there are several devices like appliances, home appliances, that produces electromagnetic interferences. Okay, we have also the RFI or the radio frequency interferences. So these are also coming from different devices like photocopiers, microwave oven. Okay, so ways to reduce EMI or RFI on network cabling. So keep network media away from sources of EMI. So as much as possible, if you're going to install cable, so don't make it near, or don't install it near the devices or equipments that may be a source of electromagnetic interference. Second, ensure that network media is properly installed. Okay, so as much as possible, if that is a structured cabling, so as much as possible, you have to use a PVC pipe to enclose the cable, or a cable tray to properly segregate the network cables to power cables or other cables on a building or a location. Use shielded cabling. Okay, so as much as possible, use a shielded cabling. So UTP or an STP, especially for outdoor. So there's a cable which is primarily used for outdoor cabling, which is the shielded twisted pair, and that is used for outdoor cabling. Use repeaters. Okay, so again, to prevent attenuation. So if you really need to connect devices or networks on a longer distance, so you can use a repeater. Ensure that you install high quality cables. Okay, so sometimes um, as the reliability of the cable depends also on the quality of the cable. Okay, kasi di ba may mga nabibili na sobrang ninipis ng kable. So basically, pag in-install mo siya, there's a possibility na mag-loose lang siya on, for example, on a terminal block or an I/O module or sa RJ45. Okay? So there are several cables which are very thin. The konting galaw mo lang on the RJ45 is maglulus na siya. Okay, so when you're connecting computers on the network and you have uh to to manage the computers on the network, so these are the naming rules for computers on Windows network, specifically for Windows network. Okay, so when setting up Windows network, each computer name must be properly configured. Okay. Computers having names that violate Windows guidance may, for various technical reasons, fail to network with their peers on the LAN. Okay, so these are several rules in naming computers on the network. So first is no two computers can possess the same computer name. Okay, same as well with IP address. There should be the same IP address on the network. Okay, so no two computers can possess the same computer name. So ensure all computer names are unique. Okay, so next is ensure each computer name is no longer than 15 characters. Okay, so that's a maximum number of characters. But in practical, on its configuration, you can assign computer name longer than 15 characters, but on the network, 15 characters is only the recognized characters on the network. Ensure no computer name contains spaces. Avoid special characters in computer names. Whenever possible, do not use any of these characters when naming Windows computers. And I think if you're going to use these characters, you will be prompted that those characters are invalid. Avoid using lowercase letters in computer name whenever possible. Older versions of Microsoft Windows, however, treat computer names as case sensitive. Okay, but I think at present, since maybe today we are organizations are using Windows 10 or Windows 11, so I think the older versions, which are very much case sensitive, maybe does not exist, or there are only few computers which runs older versions of Microsoft Windows. Okay, so we have the local area network standard. So network standard define guideline that specify the way computer access the medium to which they attach. So since we have different network devices, equipments, cables, so there should be standard. Okay, so basically the standard is used for those devices to interoperate with one another. Okay, the guideline also describe the type of medium used, the speeds used on different type of physical cable or wireless technology used. The well-known standards adopted by the IEEE are the 802 standards, and those are standards for networks. The 802 standard. This physical cabling is specify the way data transmitted. Okay, so we have the 802.3, 802.7, 802.8, 802.11. These are the standards on networking. So Okay, so we have the 802.3 or the Ethernet LAN. So this refers to yung mga Cat5 cables natin, RJ45 network interface cards. So those are their physical networks using Cat5 cables or network devices like that. Okay, so 802.3 Ethernet refers to the physical cabling, while the way data is transmitted through the cable is called carrier sense multiple access collision detection or the CSMA/CD. Okay, so yung CSMA/CD or the collision detection. So since your Ethernet LAN transmits on a physical network or a physical connectivity. So imagine if you have so many computers on the network. So there's a possibility that two computers, let's say for example this one, will transmit or may transmit data at the very same time. Okay, at the very same time. So basically the two computers send data at the very same time. For example, this is the destination. Okay, so we have the carrier sense multiple access or collision detection. Okay, so what happens here is because uh, two computers transmit data at the very same time, there will be data collision. So meaning to say they will collide on a very specific time because the two computers transmit data at the very same time. Okay, so for 802.3 or Ethernet LAN, it uses the carrier sense multiple access collision detection. So what happens here is, from the word itself, detection. So when a collision is detected, so what happens to the network is that it sends data back and try to resubmit the data on a random time. So not at the same time. Because kasi kung parehas pa rin siya ng time interval, so basically magkakaroon pa rin ng collision. Okay? So what happens here on the collision detection is that if a collision is detected, it will ask the sender, let's say the two computers, to resend the data at a very random time. Magkaibang time naman siya para to avoid collision. Okay? So that is the technology used in the 802.3 to avoid collision, the CSMA/CD or the carrier sense multiple access collision detection. Okay, so we have the 802.7 for the broadband LAN. So these are used for our broadband technology. So this 802.7 standard provides specifications for the design, installation, and testing needed for broadband transmissions. Okay, let's say for example, yung mga USB broadband nyo, yung wireless broadband. So those are the 802.7. So broadband transmission allows simultaneous multiple transmission or signal using different communication channels at the same time. Okay, so we have 802.8. So this is one of the getting popular LAN connectivity, which is the fiber optic. So this standard gives the recommendation for the configuration testing of fiber optic local area network and metropolitan area networks. Okay, these are fiber optic cables. So that's 802.8. And for the wireless, we have the 802.11 for the wireless LAN. Okay, so this is the standard for the wireless transmission or for wireless network connectivity. The standard defines communication between a wireless computer or client and an access point or between two wireless computers or clients. Okay, the 802.11 standard uses the 2.4 gigahertz and or 5 gigahertz frequency band to transmit data. So there are several routers which uses dual band. So I mean, say it caters 2.4 older versions of wireless technology or wireless 802.11, and the newest or the present or the newest technology is the 5 gigahertz frequency band for wireless 802.11. Okay, so when designing network, consider IP addressing. So it's important that you know how to assign IP address to computers because that is very essential to networking. So computers or devices needs to have IP address for you to be able to have connectivity with the network infrastructure. So there are three ways to assign IP address to computer. Okay, number one is static addressing. So you do the manual assignment of IP address on your network or your devices or computers. Okay, so there are several computers which or servers or devices or equipments which needs to have static IP address. For example, yung mga servers, okay? Kaya siya static para hindi pa bago-bago because you are accessing the same server for a particular application, so it needs to have a static IP address. We also have the DHCP or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So it allows automatic assignment of IP address from a DHCP server, whether it's a server, a router. So basically, there should be a DHCP server on the network. And as much as possible for the design, you still have, or for the network design, you need to have a single DHCP on the network. So so that you have a so that you have a single IP addressing all throughout the network. Okay. So the problem with multiple DHCP is that because they may be conflict, and remember that there may be conflict on distribution of IP address. Okay. So meaning to say, baka itong si DHCP1 can provide the same IP as DHCP2. Okay. So magkaagulo yung IP addressing nyo. Okay. So as much as possible, you only have the one DHCP server on the network. Okay, next we have the APIPA or the automatic private IP addressing. I'll be explaining that later. Okay, the static IP addressing, it's a manual way of obtaining an IP address for your computer where the IP address is predetermined and always the same. Okay, so you manually configure the IP address of devices or computers on the network. Web servers and FTP servers are good examples of machines which would require static IP addresses. So if you feel the need to always know what your IP address is, then you need a static IP address because it is constant. Okay? We have the DHCP, allows your computer to automatically obtain a full functional IP address from the central DHCP server. So again, as much as possible, you only have one DHCP server working on your network. So every time you boot your computer, your operating system retrieves an IP address coming from the DHCP server. So your computers, your devices, if that is configured to work on a DHCP IP addressing, so it will get an IP address from a DHCP server. An example is a server or a router. Okay, so the APIPA or the automatic private IP addressing, so this is a Windows function. This is a Windows function which allows automatic IP addressing. If you don't have the DHCP server, then Windows operating systems automatically assigns an IP address from this range, the 169.254.0.0, 169.254.255.255. That's the range of the APIPA. So, for example, if you don't have the DHCP server and you did not assign a static IP address to computers, once you connect it to the network, it will automatically get an IP which is on the range 169.254 for you to have a network connectivity, automatic network connectivity without a DHCP server. Okay, so that is created by the Windows operating system. So it detects that there's a network and it will assign an automatic private IP addressing. Okay, so remember that when you are building a website, so always remember that websites, domains do have public IP or it requires public IP addresses. Okay, so we have two types of IP addressing, the public and the private IP address. Okay, so public means the IP address can be visited from any computer in the world. So meaning that the IP address is visible on the internet infrastructure. structure or the internet. Okay, so let's say for example 10.1.1.1. That 11.1.1.1 is assigned to a web server, which is connected to the internet. So this 11.11, this 11.1.1.1, which is assigned to this server, is now visible to the internet, Okay, so because it uses a public IP. Okay, so we also have the private IP addressing. We also have the private IP addressing. So it means that this can only be used on the same network or the internal network. Okay? And with the IP version 4, diba, for the IP version 4, we have the maximum or the approximate number of IP addresses that can be provided by the IP version 4 is around 4.3 billion IP addresses. And those are some of the public IP addresses, or most of the public IP addresses comes from the IP version 4. Okay? So there are exception to those IP addresses. So the 10.0.0.0 to 10.255.255.255, 172, this is a class A, this is a class B, and this is a class C. That's 172.16.0.0, 172.31.255.255, and for class C, 192.168.0.0 and 192.168.255.255, or class C, are considered to be private IP address. And it can never be used for public IP address. Okay? So these are assigned specifically for private IP addressing. Okay, so we have the shared means connections are shared with others, committed information rate, or CIR. So basically your connections is being shared. So if you are going to subscribe to a telecom company, we have what we call as a shared and dedicated IP address. When we talk about shared, we are only sharing connections to others. So meaning to say, if you are given 100 Mbps, you are not guaranteed the 100 Mbps on your connection because you are just shared to others, to other connectivities. Okay? For dedicated, it means that no one else uses your IP address for their connections or websites. So meaning to say, you are the only one using the IP address, and those IP address is dedicated. Okay? Nobody, you don't share with anyone the IP address that you are using. So meaning to say, your internet connection is just assigned to you, okay, or to your network. Okay? So as unlike with the shared, so you are given an IP address which are shared, which means that their connectivity is being shared with other users on the network. Okay? So what is a packet? So the term packet refers to, it turns out that everything you do on the network or internet involves packets. So everything that being sent on the network is considered to be a packet. For example, every web page that you receive comes from a series of packets, and every email you send leaves a series of packets. So these are example of the packets. Just like with the discussion of the OSI, so basically the OSI defines what are the data being added to your, or the data being added to your PDU or the protocol data unit for you to be able to have that entire packet. Okay? So meaning to say, everything that you send on the network requires packet transmission. Okay, so we have the media access control, or the MAC address, are physical addresses. So unlike IP addresses, which are logical address. So when you talk about logical addresses, so basically we can change the IP address. We can change the IP address because that is logical. Okay, unlike with the media access, those are physical addresses. So meaning to say, those MAC addresses are burnt in into your network card's memory chipset. So meaning to say, those are embedded on your chipset or your network devices chipset. So I mean to say they are fixed. Okay, you cannot change the MAC address of a particular device, whether it's a network interface card, a switch, a router. So those do have media access control or MAC addresses. Okay, so examining a MAC address. So how does the MAC address looks like? So basically, the MAC address looks like this. So 6 pairs of hexadecimal. It's an example. This is 0002B3C3C3268. So MAC addresses are always presented in hexadecimal format or 6 pairs of hexadecimal number. Okay, so the IEEE or the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers group split the MAC address in half and used the first half to identify the vendor, and the second half is for the vendor to allocate as serial numbers. Okay, so we have two parts of the vendor code is specified by the RFC 1700. The MAC address is burnt into the network card's memory. Okay, so these are the two parts of the MAC address. So the first part is the vendor side. So meaning to say this is assigned for vendor. For vendor. So let's say for example, this MAC address is assigned to D-Link. Okay, to the D-Link brand. Let's say for D-Link routers, and the other half would be their serial number. So this may be the same on devices, but the other 3 pairs will be different because this acts as a serial number to the device. Okay, so we have two parts: the vendor side and the device identification. Okay, so these are the two parts of the media access control address or the MAC address. So the first part would be for the vendor, and the other part would be for the device or the device identification. Okay, so we have also the term network address translation. Okay, so in the NAT translation, pag siguro narinig niyo yung term na NAT translation or network address translation, it is a process where a network device, usually a firewall, assigns a public address to a computer inside a private network. The main use of NAT is to limit the number of public IP addresses on an organization or company must use for both economy and security purposes. Okay? Ganito kasi nangyayari. For you to be able to be part of the internet, you need to have a public IP. Okay? But for example, if you have an internal network, so for you to be able to be part of the internet, all of your computers or devices should have public IP. But, if that will be the case, masyado magastos on IP addressing yan. Okay? First is that you only connect to the internet. So these other computers on the internet would not connect on you. Okay? So basically, you are wasting public IP address. Okay? And for you to be able to connect, for example, this computer, to connect to the internet, you have to have public IP. Since you don't have public IP, dadaan ka sa isang device which translate the public IP to private IP addressing. Okay, let's say for example, this is let's make it smaller scale, 192.168.1.2. Okay, so let's say you have computers here, and dadaan siya sa router. So the router will translate it to a public IP to be part of the internet. Okay, go back again. If you have this, if you're accessing a particular server, for example, Google server, you access a service, ibabalik niya dito sa public IP and translate it to the internal network which do have private IP address. Okay? Una-una para hindi magastos sa IP addressing. Okay? And another thing is that for you to be able to access the internet connectivity on an internal network. Okay? So that is the function of the network address translation. to convert the public IP to the public IP to private IP addressing. Okay, these are example of some LAN implementation. So we have the internet, the router, then connect to the hub, then the workstations. That's a simple network diagram. So this is the server. Okay, so again, the router function as a network address translator. So to translate the request from the private network to the public network or the internet, and going back, giving the service again from public IP to private IP address. Okay, that's the function of the network address translation. Okay, this is a simple network diagram. Okay, so again, this is also a simple network connectivity diagram. Okay, so for this diagram, we only added an access point for the wireless devices. Okay, and I think you'll be doing also an activity with creating access points or wireless networks in Cisco Packet Tracer. Okay, so same as well with this one. We have the internet, we have the wireless router, we have the LAN computer, and the wireless connectivity. Okay, so these are examples of LAN networks or LAN implementation, simple LAN implementation. Okay, so that will be all for my discussion about network configurations and guidelines. Okay, so